Well, good afternoon. It's 1 o'clock here Mountain Time and noon for our friends up north in Pacific Time. My name is Brian Wolf, the Idaho State Controller, and just good afternoon and welcome to everyone. Thank you for being here today. You know, this is our first session of our four-part series sponsored by the Idahoans for Openness in Government, better known to many of you as IDOG. It's great. There we go, right? It's great to see such a turnout from the agencies, media, local governments, and members of the public who care deeply about how government serves its citizens. I know we have several here in the room, and I know we have probably about 50 or 60 are watching online. At the heart of today's campaign finance training from Idaho's election guru and the next three sessions is a simple idea. Government belongs to the people. When we operate in the open, when the meetings are public, when records are accessible, and when information is shared rather than guarded, we strengthen the very foundation of trust that makes our republic work. Sunshine and transparency aren't buzzwords. They're commitments. They're how we show Idahoans that we are worthy of their confidence, that decisions aren't made behind closed doors, that accountability isn't optional, but expected. And in an era when the public trust can feel fragile, openness is one of the most important tools that we have to repair and reinforce that. IDOG has played an important role in that work for more than 2 decades. These seminars began as a partnership between journalists, state officials, and civic leaders who wanted to make Idaho's public records and open meeting laws understandable, practical, and usable for everyone. Over the years, IDOG sessions have been held in communities across the state, from Coeur d'Alene to Idaho Falls, bringing together local elected officials, city clerks, law enforcement, school districts, and citizens to learn, ask questions, and build a shared understanding of transparency done right. We're fortunate today to be guided by someone who has been at the center of this work from the start. Betsy Russell is not only the founder of IDOG, but is also one of the most respected journalists and advocates for public access. Now a retired newspaper reporter, Betsy has worked tirelessly to ensure that openness isn't an afterthought, but a core principle of good government. She has trained thousands of Idaho public officials and citizens on the state's transparency laws, and her leadership continues to shape how openness is understood across our state. A graduate of the University of Cal Berkeley, she holds a master's degree in journalism from Columbia University. Before finishing her 5 years of work at the Idaho Press, she was also a reporter for 27 years at the Idaho Spokesman Review. At the Spokesman Review and the Idaho Press, she wrote the widely read Eye on Boise blog about Idaho politics and government, which she started in 2004. She previously worked for 5 years as a reporter and editor for the Idaho Statesman in Boise, and earlier worked on several newspapers in California. She is married with 2 grown children and is an avid skier and windsurfer. Please join me in welcoming Betsy Russell, the driver and spearhead behind all of these educational opportunities.
Welcome, everyone. IDOG is a nonprofit coalition for openness in government and is affiliated with the National Freedom of Information Coalition. There's more about us at our website, which is openidaho.org. Our mission is to foster open government supervised by an informed and engaged citizenry. We believe that we all benefit when the public, the media, and government officials are fully aware of the public's rights to access government information and observe the conduct of the public's business. During our program today, we will be taking questions from the audience, and Brandon and I, as moderators, will pose those questions at the end to Phil, our speaker, during a Q&A session. There are a couple of ways you can submit your questions during the session. Those here in the room have cards. You can write your questions on a card and hold it up, and someone will come take the card and bring it over to us as moderators. If you are participating virtually, we have a dedicated email address where you can send your questions. It is idogquestions@gmail.com. That's IDOG questions, plural, @gmail.com. I'd like to acknowledge all those who are joining us today. The vast majority are online, although I kept trying to get more people to come in person. Many of them are all over the state, which is pretty cool. Also, a full recording of this session, as it is of all our sessions, will be available later on our website, along with all the slides. I would like to thank our partners, Idaho Secretary of State Phil McGrane, Idaho State Controller Brandon Wolf, the Idaho Association of Cities, the Association of Idaho Counties, the Idaho Press Club, Idaho Public Television, Attorneys for Civic Education, the BSU School of Public Service, and the University of Idaho College of Law. You have two handouts today. One is a flyer about all 4 of the sessions that we're doing this year, which will be over the coming months. The other is just a little bit of information about IDOG. What is IDOG? Where can you find us on the web? How can you join us if you'd like to support us? We welcome that. If you are an attorney, thanks to our partnership with Attorneys for Civic Education, you can receive continuing legal education credit through the Idaho State Bar for participating in today's workshop. Please sign up on the list in back if you're attending in person, or if you're participating online, follow the instructions you received in an email from the bar, or email Teresa Baker at the bar, and she will connect you with that. We are very fortunate today to have Idaho Secretary of State Phil McGrane as our featured speaker on campaign finance and lobbying, the rules, and how to access the data. Phil is a 4th-generation Idahoan, a true elections buff, an advocate for government transparency, and is Idaho's 28th Secretary of State, an office he won in 2022 with 72% of the vote. He started his career in Ada County as an elections specialist, including training poll workers and tracking hanging chads when we still voted on punch cards, and then became chief deputy and then Ada County clerk, focusing always on making elections more accessible, transparent, secure, and fair. He holds a degree in philosophy from the University of Washington, a master's in public administration from Boise State University, and a law degree from the University of Denver. He is also a fan of Kansas City-style barbecue and is a pitmaster for a successful competition barbecue team with his father-in-law, earning numerous awards in chicken, ribs, pork, and brisket. He and his wife, Angela, have 3 children. Phil's been recognized and celebrated by Time Magazine, Best Places to Work in Idaho, Accomplished Under 40, TEDx Boise, and even Food and Wine Magazine, which featured his food truck voting concept, inspired by his barbecue background and aimed at making voting more accessible. Please welcome Phil McGrane.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. And Betsy, thank you for the very, very kind introduction. And also, I just want to recognize again Controller Wolf for his great words. It reminded me as we start off this series, not just today's talk, but just the importance of transparency in government. I think the work that Betsy and IDOG do are really fundamental to what we do here in the State House. It's the people's business that is conducted in here, and it's so easy when you're in the thick of it to lose sight of some of that. And I think this series really gets to highlight it, whether we're talking about money in politics, which we'll be talking about a lot today, but really talk about transparent Idaho and our fiscal responsibility, open meeting laws, public records. All of these things come together really as an opportunity for us to serve. And I have to share, before I really get into my actual remarks, a couple of my favorite quotes. I had the good fortune of working with IDOG now for numerous sessions and partnership in a variety of ways. And each time, and when I was hearing the controller talk, I think of these things. One of my predecessors, Secretary Usursa, used to always use this quote from Henry Clay all the time. Government is a trust, and the officers of the government are trustees. And both the trust and the trustees are created for the benefit of the people. And I think, again, that's what brings us here. But I think when we think about light and government, Patrick Henry once said, the liberties of the people never were, never ever will be, secure when the transactions of their rulers may be concealed from them. I think when you think of public records and public access, and I know we see many of our media partners here, One of the biggest things is to be able to shed light on what is happening in those who are governing. One of the beauties as we look towards this next year and the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence is, if you ever have a moment to look at the Declaration of Independence, most people focus on the final 2 paragraphs, which are the sacrifices that our founding fathers made, but most of it is a list of grievances. And some of those grievances are exactly what we're here to talk about as part of this series, is being able to have a voice among those who are governing you, being able to know what it is that's driving the decisions of those that are governing you. And it brings us here. And finally, as I get into campaign finance and lobbying, what my actual area of expertise is, my favorite quote when it comes to it all is from none other than Mother Teresa. She says, "Honesty and transparency make you vulnerable. Be honest and transparent anyway." And I think that's a good reminder for all of us. And, and I will say it highlights the work that we do in our office. I have an amazing team, many of them who are here today, who assist us in supporting the public and all the candidates, all of the public partners in the process, the lobbyists that are in the building, legislators working through all of this. And really our main focus is to serve everyone and to try and shed light. I had a conversation, ironically, earlier this morning where somebody asked me, like, why do you want so many of the public involved in what we're doing? I was like, I don't know any other way to operate other than in the sunlight. It makes me uncomfortable to think of doing it in any other way. And I think that's an important thing, and I think it's one of the missions of IDOG is to try and get everybody to feel that same feeling. Like, let's do things in the open. That makes everybody feel better about what's happening. Whether they agree or disagree about the outcome is irrelevant. It's about shedding light on what we do. Now, I have already heard, what did you say, elections buff, guru. I usually say elections nerd or junkie. Needless to say, I do love this stuff. And so hopefully I'll be able to entertain you, especially those of you online that are watching, as well as shed some light on what Idaho's campaign finance laws and sunshine laws are. And so I'm going to start off. So Idaho's sunshine laws are enacted in Title 67, 66. And actually, this is an interesting presentation. I've given this most of this presentation before with IDOG, but we have had some significant changes over the last legislative session. We made some changes, and I'll talk about those in detail a lot more as I go through. But it's worth noting, money in politics goes back as like beginning of time. One of my favorite things to share is one of the first elected officials to face a campaign finance violation was none other than George Washington himself, because he gave out too much rum in trying to earn votes. And Congress actually changed the laws because of Mr. Washington. And so if he can do it, anybody can. And so, what's interesting, for the longest time in our country, back in the 1800s, we used to have some of the highest turnout. And it happens to be that when you provide people beer and bribes, they show up to vote. We stopped that practice long ago, and with time, we've put more light and transparency into the money that goes into politics. And really, our modern campaign finance laws, whether that's here in Idaho or really across the country, stem from the 1970s. So after the Watergate scandal, Congress actually felt it was important to start regulating this space, and in the 1970s they created the Federal Election Commission. Federal Election Commission still exists today. Despite their name, really what they oversee is campaign finance. They don't actually oversee anything elections, they just oversee money in politics. And as all of us have witnessed, they oversee a lot of it. At that same time, the various states took it upon themselves to start regulating this space. Interestingly enough, as part of our history here in Idaho, our legislature, while they took up the issue, they couldn't agree and come up with laws. So the citizens of Idaho took it upon themselves to pass our campaign finance laws. So our campaign finance laws that we have today are a citizens' initiative from the 1970s. And as my staff hears me say often, they also read like a citizens' initiative from the 1970s. And I'm spending most of my time trying to figure out how to unwind what was done a long time ago, to modernize it, update it. We'll talk about that as we go through a little bit. But at the core of what they serve, and I think this is one of the most important things to highlight through our discussion, is what the purpose is. So 676601, this is the beginning, is just showing the purpose. And I've had many conversations regarding campaign finance where we go back to when we're interpreting these laws, is really leaning on why do we have these laws in the first place. And the first and foremost is to promote public confidence in government. If you believe that your elected officials are being swayed or bribed in the process, right, or they were unduly elected, it doesn't do any of us any good in terms of our governance. And so by shedding light on all the activity that's happening, all the money that comes into the system, we build that public confidence. The other part of it, and I think IDOG is a big champion of this, is to promote openness in government and to promote transparency by those giving financial support to election campaigns, those promoting or opposing legislation, or attempting to influence executive or administrative actions for compensation. I mean, it boils down to, as a member of the voting public, if somebody is giving somebody money in the process, you have a right to know who is influencing it. And in our office, in the campaigns finance space and the lobbyist space, we sit right at the center of all that traffic and activity. And there's a lot more of it than people ever realize. At the end of this, I'm going to share some of our data that some of you are accustomed to, just to show how much money is pouring in. And I will say this is a very timely topic as we head into the 2026 election cycle, because Idaho is going to see more money coming into politics. We're already seeing it. But before we get there, let's talk a little bit about the rules. So as I talk, I've got this broken out, and we've since actually separated the two statutes. For the longest time, campaign finance and lobbying were woven together in our laws. Last legislative session, we convinced the legislature to separate the two. While both involve money and politics, they are very different things. Campaign finance, which is what we'll talk about first, really focuses on the money spent to help someone win, to win an election, right? So it's all the money that goes to candidates or that's spent on the TV ads, the vote for me or vote against so-and-so. All of that is what we're going to talk about in the campaign finance space. And then we're going to shift to lobbying. And lobbying is, instead of campaigning to the general public, lobbying is focused on influencing policymakers and decision makers' opinions. And so that's the people whining and dining, and we'll talk a little bit more about what lobbying looks like. But we've separated these out because they do have different rules when it comes to it. One of the biggest things in our campaign finance laws and the rules is it is a literal accounting of every dollar that comes in and every dollar that goes out that is spent in elections, campaigning for or against. So when candidates raise money, whether it's their own money, money that's given by other people, they have to report every dollar and the source of every dollar that comes in. Similarly, they have to report all the money that they spend and what they spend it on. And so we'll be talking about the details because there are rules. But it's one of the interesting things is this accounting. Often when someone runs for office, they don't realize what they're signing up for. Or worse, is their friend who signs up to be treasurer doesn't realize what they're signing up for. Okay. One of the main things, this has been one of the biggest and best updates, I think, around the state, is the Secretary of State's office, so my office and team oversee our Sunshine Portal. Our Sunshine Portal is the one-stop shop for all the campaign finance information. So we just conducted local elections here throughout the state, so city council elections, school trustees, fire districts, others. All of those campaign finance accounts and reporting were with the Secretary of State's office. We aren't the regulator of all that. We'll talk about it. But all of it is reported online. So we have one central place where Idahoans can go both to report if they're a candidate or somebody who needs to report, as well as for us and the public, one stop that we can go see all the information. Here's the QR code if you want to look at it. The responsibility of all of this is shared. At the state level, we oversee all state candidates. That includes statewide candidates, legislative candidates, the judiciary. At the federal level, I'll mention again, the FEC oversees all federal elections, which is an entirely different subject matter and topic. And then for all county, city, school, you name it, other taxing district that has elections, the local county clerk is the one who oversees it. I will say our team, Peggy and Becca, spend a lot of time supporting the counties. We have full-time staff who dedicate themselves to managing and monitoring campaign finance, where the counties, it's a side part of the responsibilities, and so we provide a lot of assistance and support along the way. And later I'll pull up Sunshine here in a little bit. Actually, here I'll just show it real quick. But for those, I think many people are in the room are familiar. Where is the mouse? Do I need to do something? Oh, there we go. Okay. Here's the Sunshine Portal. I'll come back to it to show you a few tips and tricks in terms of using it here at the end. But this is where we can see all the campaign finance spending. Okay, let's talk about the rules. When anyone decides to run for office, so the timing of this is interesting right now. So we just wrapped up an election, and a lot of you are starting to watch what's happening for the legislative elections. We're 6 months out. I think actually we're 6 months out today from election day for the primary election. Not that someone like me is paying attention to that. One of the first steps is to appoint a political treasurer and to set up a campaign finance account. You can do that on the website. You can go in there. Political treasurer, the most common political treasurers are people's spouses or friends. It's often even better if the friend happens to be an accountant. Just makes it a little easier. But I would say the norm, doesn't matter what size campaign it is, it's usually people familiar with each other. The political treasurer must be a registered voter in the state of Idaho, and we'll validate that when setting up the accounts. A candidate has to, so before someone could go out and publicly announce that they are a candidate, they need to sign up and already be reporting. One of the things that we'll see candidates get in trouble from time to time is when they're using their own money. A lot of times people want to set up their own website, get their yard signs built. They kind of want to build up their campaign before they launch it. They can do that, but they still have to set up their campaign finance. As soon as they raise or spend a single dollar on their campaign, they are required to report, or if they publicly announce that they're a candidate, they have to report. The only exception to that is for local candidates. Local candidates have an exemption. If they don't raise or spend more than $500, they don't have to report. It allows for the smaller districts around the state who don't really have much money flowing into these races to be able to run for office without having the burden of reporting. But once they hit that $500 mark, they have to report. For all the legislative campaigns, which I'm guessing most of the room is really interested in, they have to report all the way through from the very get-go. So when they first create that website, reporting begins. They have to start tracking all the dollars that they spend, as well as any of the money they start receiving. Same thing if they start getting donations. The candidates, let's see. I think I already hit all that stuff. Okay, I already mentioned this before. All money raised or spent must be tracked and reported. There are no anonymous contributions or expenses. And I think that people struggle. So let's just hypothetically say I was going to run for re-election as Secretary of State. I mean, just let's really talk a difficult hypothetical here. And I wanted to pass the hat and all of you were going to contribute. That's not going to work because I won't know who put what into the hat. And every candidate must report. And so this includes, let's just say someone puts $5 in there. And we'll talk about campaign finance limits here in a minute. All of the money, you must know the source of it. If it's anonymous, either you must figure out who it's from and either try to return it or get their name, or under state law, it must be turned into the school fund, right? It goes to the state controller to be deposited for public education. We do have contribution limits in terms of reporting. So any contribution of $50 or less can be unitemized, meaning you don't actually have to publicly list the names. So if someone gives that $5, you don't have to list the name. But for our purposes and the reporting purposes, you do have to know the name and address of who gave it, because that person may have given you $5 today, but then tomorrow may give you 50 more. And once they've given you more, all of the money that they've given has to be disclosed and reported. I will say more and more, and there was a bill 2 sessions ago to change this, is most candidates just report all of it. Like if you were to go look at my campaign finance reports, you'll see I have someone who's given me $1. They're also on there with everybody else who's given money, because it's often just easier to put in the information. And again, more sunshine never hurts anybody. On terms of expenditures under $25 don't have to be itemized, but again, you have to know the source. Everybody, our office and the county clerk's offices have the ability to inspect any of the records or the financial accounts of any of the candidates if there are questions about their reporting and the accuracy of the reporting. All right, this is often one of the biggest topics and a lot of questions come from it, is the donation limits. Idaho does have contribution limits specifically for candidates. So candidates running for office are limited at a statewide level to $5,000 per individual. We'll talk more about that. $1,000 for legislative, county, and local offices. I'll note that $1,000 also applies to like judicial district judges if there are any elections. Statewide would apply to the Supreme Court, any of the statewide offices. limits are per individual business or political committee. I'm going to talk about that on another slide. Let's see, I'm going to skip to the other slide. This is right now, so I'll talk about timing here in a little bit, but any contribution of $1,000 or more must be reported within 48 hours. So if you were to go look at Sunshine, that is what most of the activity is right now, is the large donations coming in to the candidates, whether they're legislative candidates or statewide, because there isn't a regular reporting period yet. And so right now it's just the timed contributions is what we'll refer to them as that are coming in. So it's all those 48-hour reports coming in. So whether it's $1,000, so $1,000 is the maximum for a legislative candidate, that's all you'll see. Or for a statewide official, it's anything above $1,000. Those same limits apply to in-kind donations. An in-kind donation is something of value other than cash, right? So if someone hosts an event at their home and they buy a bunch of food, that's an in-kind donation, the money they spent on that food. You, as a candidate or a political committee, have to actually report how much was spent on the food. So if someone went to Costco, they bought chips and cookie and salsa and soda, you need to find out that they went to Costco, how much did they spend, and then report it. And that in-kind donation is also part of the limits. So say they give you, they spent $500 on food and they also gave you $500, they've now reached the maximum contribution. Okay, this is the part we get some of the most questions about in terms of these limits. Here's kind of the most typical situation in terms of, for those who are receiving maximum donations, is it's $1,000 per individual. And so in and we'll call it an average household, you could have the individual and their spouse can each give $1,000. And then if they own a business or businesses, this is where we see it, those collective businesses with common ownership are limited to $1,000. So it's not $1,000 per business. It's if there's, so the threshold that we have set based on a bunch of things, and I can answer questions later, is if 20% ownership or greater, there's common ownership, then those businesses are limited to the collective campaign finance limit. And this comes up from time to time. Interestingly enough, I'll say this, business limits often seems to come up more in the context of local elections, like city elections, even than it does in legislative or other races. And that's just because different interested parties based on what the governments do. All right, political committees. We have two main groups in this space. We have candidates, which is what most people think. Candidates raising money for their campaigns to get people to vote for them and spending it. And then we have political action committees. Political action committees, we've all heard about them in the news. These are the organizations that form, so it's a group of people that form to either support or oppose a candidate or multiple candidates or a ballot measure, right? Again, supporting or opposing it. We have many political committees here in the state of Idaho. Same, just like candidates, political committees must report all of their donations and their expenditures, the money that comes in and the money that goes out. The biggest distinction between political committees and candidates is there are no limits. So as we just talked about, the candidates have either a $1,000 or $5,000 limit for their campaigns. But the political committees, it's unlimited. So if someone has $1 million, they want to lend to a cause, they can. And honestly, we are at that point that we're starting to see numbers like that come into some of the political committees. Political committees may make contributions, make donations to candidates, but they are also limited at the same amount. So just like on that previous slide, here, if we added another version for political committee, the political committee may give up to $1,000. That $1,000 may be in the form of cash as a donation, or it could be in terms of in-kind support, but it's up to the same campaign finance limit. Now, where we see most of the activity is political committees will act, they may be supporting or opposing a candidate, but they will act independently. So there's no coordination with the political committee, or with the candidate, I mean. This is what probably most of us are actually familiar with when you think of campaigns, is all the mailers, TV ads, other things that come that are paid for by some, this group for liberty or this other group for democracy. It doesn't really matter. They have a lot of similar names. They're putting out information. They're not consulting with the candidate they're supporting. Obviously not consulting with those they oppose. There's no coordination between them. That is one of the biggest things that actually we monitor in a lot of the space, is just preventing coordination between them. Because there are no limits for political committees where there are limits for candidates, Political committees just operate on their own, and they're unlimited in those efforts. And so often you may hear, and I can relate to this in my own experiences, where a candidate, somebody, like, there's a mailer about them, but they had no idea it was created. They know nothing about it, and it's because a PAC did it on their behalf, and the candidate learned about it the same way the general public did. But if you go to Sunshine, you can see who the source of it was when they were doing it. Political committees are on the same reporting schedule as candidates, so they report on a monthly basis during the year of the election. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And I think this last piece is really important. We hear about this all the time, is IRS. So there's the federal government and its regulations related to taxes, so the IRS. So everyone in this space will talk about 501c3s, 501c4s. There's a bunch of other numbers that IRS issues. The state of Idaho does not care. The state of Idaho's laws don't care if you're a C Corp, an LLC, 501c3. It does not matter. The rules apply the same. If you meet the elements of forming a political committee, you are obligated to report as a political committee. There is no distinction between them. And so that's a really important thing. So basically, if you're going to be engaged in paid political activity, and that's really important, it's the paid political speech, not the unpaid. So if you're on Facebook just posting something, right, you can do that all day long. That's just what we call free speech. But when you start paying to boost those Facebook ads and you're actually putting money behind that speech, now you have a reporting obligation to share where the source of that money is coming from. Okay, for candidates and political committees, the reporting periods, it's in the year of the election. So it's the 10th of each month. This is to make it just predictable for the candidates. And then an annual report on the 10th of January for the following year. So right now, for legislative, statewide, and others, we're in a non-reporting year. So the only, as I mentioned before, it's only those timed contributions, those $1,000 and up, that are currently being reported. But here, coming up pretty quickly, I always like to compare it to a game of Texas Hold'em. You're going to have everyone have to show their cards because they have to report everything for the entire year at the end. And so I know that the reporters in the room will be clicking through all the reports that come in, but the non-election year. And then once January hits, it's monthly reporting for all, so legislative candidates, whether they're contested or not, it's regularly reporting throughout that period of time. And I will note, it's the inverse for local candidates. So this year, it was all the city candidates, the trustees and everything reported monthly. Next year, they won't report except for annually, and it's will be flipped. I will say there's a lot of conversation about tweaking some of these. The legislature, campaign finance is a hot topic for the legislature right now because we're seeing such an influx of money. For any reports that are late, whether that's time contribution reports or for the monthly reports, there's a 48-hour grace period to get the report in. Our office really prides themselves, and the team here really works hard. We will go, not only will we send text messages and emails, we'll start calling people to try and help make sure they report. One of our biggest goals is to make it, to assist people in their reporting. The best way to shed light on everything is to make it easy for people to comply with the law and then to make it more transparent. That's our main goal prior to trying to get to any fines. Our goal is to not fine people, but unfortunately it comes up. People either make mistakes or aren't paying attention, and we do. All right, disclosures. If for anybody considering running for office or anybody in this space, I will say this slide probably matters the most because it is the most triggering thing when it comes to complaints. So all campaign materials, billboards, TV ads, mailers, flyers, pretty much anything should indicate who it is paid for by. So there's a disclosure statement on all these things. So any of the materials that go out to the public at large, right? If you're hitting the voting population, it needs to clearly indicate who paid for it. So the statute says a person responsible for the communication shall be clearly indicated. The best example and the most common practice is to say paid for by, as you see, Yosemite Sam for governor. I would encourage anybody in this space not only to put it on there. So what we see in our office in terms of complaints is if someone doesn't put that on there, there will be complaints quickly. Most complaints are filed by somebody's opponent who's watching it, right? This is kind of a self-regulating space. Everyone's watching each other and calling each other out. But not putting a disclosure is one of the first things that the voting public will call our office, because it just irritates them. Oddly, I almost think that if you put paid for by, they will never look into who actually paid for it or go chase it down. But if you don't put it, then they all of a sudden care. And I would say the easiest thing. I also encourage, don't get creative. 10-point font on a 50-foot billboard just doesn't cut it. Like, make sure that people can identify it. And also, there's no real benefit in hiding it. It's expected. It's a practice that is required by law. I've seen at least one mailer where they put the paid for by like in the wave of the American flag, so you could barely even tell it was there. There is no need to do that. Just put somewhere on the bottom, somewhere it's easily identifiable, up in the right-hand corner, wherever, paid for by Yosemite Sam. Right? If you do that, that will solve 90% of the potential complaints. It's just someone being able to see who is the source of what I'm receiving, the message I'm receiving here, and if they want to, or if they're somebody who's in this room and they've learned what to go do with that information, they'll go to our site and they can see, all right, where did the money come from for that? All right. Betsy, would we be okay if we did questions before I do lobbying? Are you game for it? I'm game for it. I know people have questions, so you got at least one card, didn't you? Well, she does that. I'm going to pull up the Sunshine site. Hold up your cards. Yeah, there you go. Hold up your cards. I don't do good lecturing. I like geeking out more. Come on, mouse. All right, this mouse doesn't like me. There you go.
I'll give you the first one after you have your Dr. Pepper Zero Cherry.
It's like you know me.
What is the point of unitemized contributions and expenditures?
That's a great question. We would have to go back to the 1970s to figure out. I honestly think it's just convenience. When you're, especially for the reporters, when I say reporters, the candidates filing reports, I make that distinction, it can feel tedious to track every little thing. I will say the legislature has already been taking up this topic in terms of both that part of it, but also on the expenditure side, every tank of gas, figuring out what gas station it was in Coeur d'Alene that you went and bought the gas from. Right, that doesn't serve maybe the full public interest that this is intended, other than just knowing you went to Exxon and you bought gas. That's on the expenditure side, but on the contribution side, the same thing. They were putting some threshold at that time. This threshold hasn't been changed to just say you don't have to. And this will make more sense when we used to have paper reports. So most of the time, this has been regulated by sheets of paper that were filed with the Secretary of State's office. Nowadays, it's online, and our new system allows us to monitor and track things to prevent things like anonymous donations, to aggregate and do most of the math for the candidates, really to ensure accurate reporting in the process. So now, when you enter it, part of it is just us as regulators making sure everything is tracked, that you have to provide all that information. But as I mentioned too, the legislature has already been taking up the question on should just everyone report everything.
Next question. Is there anything to prevent a PAC from pretending to support a candidate by flyers or ads that actually promote ideas or issues, et cetera, that the candidate does not actually support?
That's actually a really great question in this space, and something I should just mention more broadly. If we pan out, and as we're talking about campaign finance, and I should have said this, one of the interesting things about this space is really we are at our core talking about our fundamental right of free speech. Right? If you look at the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, it discusses free speech, and political speech is the highest protected form of free speech. As I like to say, our founding fathers sacrificed a lot for us to be able to say bad things about King George. That's what this all boils down to. And what's interesting when we talk about campaign finance laws is they really are a limitation on that free speech. And what the Supreme Court has held is you cannot stop someone's ability to speak, and we are agnostic to the messages that go out. So often this is one of the most common things we hear from candidates, and I'm stretching the question a little bit, but is people say, tell this person to stop picking on me. And it's like, unfortunately, when you enter this arena, you get picked on. And that's part of the process and just being in the public sphere. And actually, even in terms of things like libel, public officials and people who put themselves in this space have less protections than the rest of us do as the general public, because political speech is at a heightened level of protection. And we actually hear that all the time, like what they said isn't true or not. We hear it from all sorts of people, regardless of party affiliation or anything else. And one of the main things is we are here to help protect people's ability to say things. Where our focus is not on what the message is, which is the core of the question. Our focus is on the money that is amplifying that message. So we don't care what someone is saying. We only care if they're using money to amplify it, or they're getting that money to spread that message. They have to report the source of the money that is spreading it. So it's adding transparency. Again, going back to the beginning of why we have the statute, is knowing that there are people putting money behind these messages. So you don't have to like the message, unfortunately. And I'm guessing there probably are campaigns that say things that, you know, one way or the other, that are mixed message. We hear all sorts of things and we get to see all of it. All of that is protected speech. Really what we're focused on is the money influencing all that. Yeah.
Well, I'm afraid you already answered this one. The question is, what can be done about political groups that put out lies?
Yeah, well, it's not limited to political groups. Pretty much anybody in this space. There is nothing, and honestly, that is one of the most common things that we hear. It's just people wanting to stop. And so the response to that is just more speech. The best solution to speech you don't like is more speech. And that's what we see, right? Just is getting more messages out there. And I think in a variety of ways, whether it's the candidates, the campaigns, the political committees, but also we have many of our members in the media. That's why you see this. The debate in the public square is a big part of this. Also, I'm going to extend the question. One of the things, too, nationally, there's a lot of discussion about, so Citizens United is a Supreme Court case and holding. That's when we talk about limits. One of the other things we hear about a lot is like, wait, why do the candidates have limits, but not the political committees? And that's because the Supreme Court has held that part of it is limiting it. You can't limit a member of the public speech. So the candidates, it's been held that you can, but in terms of the political committees, it's unlimited. And that's true for in-state, out-of-state. We're all part of the members of the United States. So we do see, and we're seeing more money coming in here from Idaho. I'll highlight here some of the data here in a minute that discusses some of that as well.
A quick reminder for those online, you can send your questions by email to idogquestions@gmail.com. And Brandon has the next question.
Are there any prohibited uses of campaign finance data, for example, for other candidates to fundraise off of?
Great question. Yes, there are limits in terms of using campaign finance data, but it's very limited. You cannot use our campaign finance data to solicit for your business, right? So let's say you're hawking your wares. You can't use it to create your own mailing list to go hawk your wares. But unfortunately, it is used by the political candidates all the time. That is different. There's a distinction between Idaho's laws in terms of the space versus federal law. The FEC, actually, there are prohibitions in using campaign finance data by like one candidate taking the data from the public site and using it. But in Idaho, there are no restrictions other than you just can't use it as a solicitation tool. Those are the only limits. Yeah.
Next question, how do you verify the identity of donors?
We do not verify the identity. So the public reporting that comes in, we post it. Really, the effect of this is just the transparency. If we receive a complaint or there's something, and that will happen. Often, I mentioned before the businesses or the campaign finance limits where you have multiple businesses, we will see reporting say all the same businesses have the same address, or there's other things like that where we'll investigate on those. But really, the cure to all of this is we are just taking in the information and sharing it with the public and going through to make sure none of the limits are hit. But from there, it's kind of a self-regulated system. And I will mention, it's interesting for us. Anytime we get a campaign finance complaint and we're investigating it, so I don't have a slide for this, but if we receive a complaint, we'll initially look into it. If there's just enough of it, we will contact the person who the complaint is made against so they can provide us any information we need to know to respond. They can say, look, I reported it, here it is. Obviously, that's probably the most common thing is we just get to clear it out. But we'll be able to look into it, and it brings our attention. That brings that issue to our attention. frequently the first responses we'll hear is, well, you know, this is just because so-and-so is supporting this other person and that's why they're complaining. And I'll just tell for everybody's sake, every complaint we receive is from somebody else who's trying to, like, we sit at the center of this. We're not naive to who it is. And heck, I can see a few people in the room who can even name the frequent flyers. Like we have, I won't name them here in the IDOG session, but I can tell you the dueling people in our space. We have our frequent flyers plus each of the individual campaigns. I will note one of the things too, what we're seeing in this space as it's evolving. Idaho politics is evolving and growing, and I'll bring up some data to show that here. More money is coming into Idaho and Idaho politics. And the area where we actually see people get in trouble as it relates to our campaign finance laws are not the big spenders. So there are groups that are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars that come in, whether it's political committees, that could be out of state, in state, doesn't really matter. Typically, the bigger players in the space are sophisticated enough that they know the laws and the rules. Recently this is the nerdiest side of me, and my staff got to watch it. We had a campaign finance compliance lawyer sit in my office with me, and for an hour, he and I just went back and forth, and I had a blast. And that's just because we're a bunch of nerds in this space. But there are people who are professionals at this, and when we see the large organizations, they know the law. I can remember a call from the last state primary election where we were on the phone with a compliance lawyer in DC, and we noted we were encouraging them to comply and to divulge. And they said, oh, no, we know. And I said, we'll comply exactly when we have to. And I think we have 4 more hours until we have to report. I mean, they knew to the T what our laws required and what they didn't require. Where we actually see, and that's true even the large campaigns, usually the larger campaigns have staff to help work on compliance. Where we see people get in trouble are what I like to call the mom and pop. It's the group of citizens. So you have 5 people who get together because they're upset about something. They pool resources together and they don't realize that they're entering a regulated space when they start putting flyers out. And it's us trying to disseminate the information. And we have a team of people, Peggy and Becca in this space. They help answer questions with these local elections recently. Is a good example of them helping walk people through what they need to put on their signs, what they need to report, all of that. And we're very happy to assist people in terms of navigating this entire space. But it usually is the smaller campaigns getting started that we see the biggest trouble, not the big money. Despite most people, when they ask us, they want us to slow down the big money. But that money is coming, unfortunately. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to share a couple of things real quick on campaign
But we
finance.
do have more questions.
Okay, go for it.
Okay. Next question, can anyone form a political committee? Could I just register myself as one to get around individual campaign limits?
Anybody can create, good question. So anybody can create a political committee. However, again, political committees cannot coordinate with candidates. So if you're a candidate and you were to create a political committee, you would be prohibited from using any of that political committee money in the campaign that you're involved in, because that's inherent coordination. And we do find instances. Same thing is like, if you're a candidate, your treasurer can't create a political committee, so the treasurer who's working on your campaign and reporting your campaign cannot also be working on the political committee, because again, it's coordination. We're looking for, because basically coordination between those political committees and candidates is a way to circumvent the campaign finance limits, which is really to the core of that question. So there has to be separation. You will hear now there are office holders that will have political committees, and from to the very top, I'm a very loud voice saying you cannot use that money for yourself. So typically, if you do see an office holder that has a political account, they are most likely should be using it either to support other candidates or to oppose other candidates. We see both of those activities, but they're using it external to the race that they're involved in. So just like any other political committee would. And honestly, this is actually, I don't have this in, this is getting into the weeds of it. One of the things we're seeing, especially with ballot initiatives, we've seen more ballot initiatives in this space and various groups that care about those initiatives. If a nonprofit organization is really interested, I'm not going to pick on any of the ones coming up, but we have some big ones that are coming up that are being circulated right now. A nonprofit, again, we don't care about their status with the IRS, but a nonprofit can, or a group related to it, form a political committee. and in a best way to keep separate the organization's dollars, their general fund dollars for their general operations, from their political speech is to form a political committee and report the specific donations that go towards the political activity. And we're really trying to steer and encourage people to form PACs in those cases so that they do collect the donor information and report it. They report the expenditures, but they only have to report that portion that is related to the the paid political speech, not related to other things that have nothing to do with this space.
Secretary, you talked about kind of the penalty for being late on some of the payments and how much, but maybe if you could talk a little bit, what is the penalty for misreporting funding, for example, and what if that person's already in office?
Oh, well,
Either
two pieces with this, yeah. Receiving a campaign finance violation does not stop someone from holding public office, doesn't stop them from running for office. It just means they have to pay a fine for violating the sunshine laws. It's kind of like speeding. You still get to stay on the road. You just have to pay the fine. And I think that's an important reminder. We often see complaints where people are trying to, they want to stop it. And unfortunately, that's not. The way that the law is set is the penalty is a fine. It could be criminal if it grows beyond that. It could be a misdemeanor. The fines for individual candidates are up to $250. For political action committees, it's up to $2,500. And really, we size the fine based on the severity of the violation. So we're looking at it. So typically, you have your late fines, like what was mentioned. But you know, I would say probably most common is $500 to $1,000, and then in gross violations, it'll get up all the to $2,500. But at candidates also, it's $250. And I will say I'm a strong advocate for us restructuring our fine schedule, because sometimes $250, you're like, well, that didn't feel like much of a, it's a slap on the hand when you've got a lot of money in this space. And again, there's a lot of conversation. Last year, campaign finance was a big topic in the legislative session, and I expect it will be coming up as well.
Maybe as a quick follow-up,
Yeah.
how has that been, is that an old Idaho statute?
All of these are old. There have been refinement to these, but all of these are old Idaho statutes. And that's one of the things when you think about it, whether we go back to the 70s or the 80s, the space has changed. Things like Facebook ads didn't exist. Text messaging didn't exist. And I will say, actually, text messaging is one of the things the legislature is struggling to wrestle with the most, because it's like 2 to 5 cents a message. You don't have to spend very much money to spread a lot of messages. And so usually in this space, dollar thresholds are part of the regulation. Well, $1,000 on a billboard, like you're only going to get one out in the sticks for $1,000. But $1,000 of text messages, you're going to hit a whole healthy portion of the state. And so part of it is us as a state trying to adapt to this space in terms of both the transparency, but I would still say this, the essence of these laws still work and exist, still having disclosure statements, still being able to report, to be able to look at the Sunshine site to see any information.
2 quick questions about contribution limits. Are political committees also limited to, say, $1,000 per election for a legislative candidate? And are the campaign donation limits per campaign or per election, such as primary, general, and so on?
A good question. The campaign finance limits do not apply to the political committees at all. So there's no limit to them on, let's say they were created specifically for one legislative race, there's no limit to that political committee being engaged. I think I talked about that before. The other question, though, in terms of the limits for candidates, it is per election. And actually right now is a perfect time to talk about it. So we just had the mayoral elections on November 4th. All those candidates could raise up to $1,000 from each of their donors. We have 3 cities that are having runoff elections here on December 2nd, and the campaign finance limits reset for them. For the 1 month that they're running for their runoff election, they can go back to their same donors, get a second donation to be able to spread their message for the second election that's occurring. Same thing, more common that we see, though, is the primary election versus the general election. The limits apply per election. That's also worth noting. So if, say, an office holder like myself or Brandon, we serve 4-year terms, any money that we've raised since our last election, which was in November of 2022, all is reported for the 2026 general election. So it doesn't matter what calendar year it happened in, those limits. So if someone gave $1,000 a year, that would add up to that $5,000 limit coming up. And so It's per election cycle.
So a quick follow-up to that. If the political committee makes a donation to a candidate, don't the limits on what the candidate can receive apply to that?
Yes, thank you. That is a good that may be a good clarifying question. There are no limits to the political committee, but if the political committee gives money directly or gives coordinated direct support to a political candidate, it is limited to the same campaign finance limits. I will also note, because you'll see this likely come up, is the limits also apply between candidate accounts. So if a candidate, I'll use myself because it's easy, if I'm the Ada County Clerk and I have a campaign finance account for Ada County Clerk and I decide hypothetically to run for Secretary of State, I am limited to transfer I can only transfer up to the limit from one campaign account to the other. So the donors who gave money to run for one office did not necessarily give that money to run for a different office. It really is, a campaign finance account is like a trust account. And the beneficiaries are the public, the people supporting it for the purpose of getting this person elected to that role. And just because someone supported you to run for one thing doesn't mean they'll support you to run for another. The only exception to that is in the legislature. If someone runs for the House and then chooses to run for the Senate, they can remove the entire amount because they're still part of the legislature as a whole. The legislature has made an exemption between legislative offices. Where this comes up most frequently is someone like shifting from local office to a state office, or someone trying to shift from the legislature to a statewide office is where you'll see that, where that money is limited to either $1,000 or $5,000.
You've traveled around, having been Secretary of State now for a couple of years. You've been to national conferences. You've been met with many of your peers. What is one thing that you're glad we have in Idaho that they don't have, that you're glad that we have, that's something that backs and supports what you do and support? And maybe what's something you wish we did have in Idaho that some other state has?
Good question. I'll start. The easy one on the first one is we have campaign finance limits. We've been talking about this in a lot of space. Our limits are probably due to be adjusted just based on inflation and spending. It's been a long time since the legislature has been in, but we do have limits. There are states without limits. And as far as I'm aware, and we've tried to look into this, we're not aware of any state that has had limits that's ever removed them. But I know from peers, going back to traveling around, like the mayor of Dallas, Texas is somebody I've been in sessions with, and he would do one fundraiser at the Oklahoma-Texas game, and he would raise a couple $100,000 because you could raise $100,000. Here we don't have that in Idaho, and so also it changes the influence. You see that from other states where there's a lot more money in politics. It's harder and harder to, the whole idea, and I know talking to members of our legislature is no one feels that they're being bought if someone gave them $1,000, right? They're still here for the focus of the public, but when you start dealing with much bigger numbers, it gets really complicated really quickly. The federal candidates also have limits. I think that's worth noting. So that's probably one of the big things there. In terms of ours still need just updating. There's a bunch of things in terms of cleaning up our campaign finance laws to modernize what there's always a balance that we're trying to. We want to shed light on what's going on, but you'll even see this with the information we have. There is such thing as just too much information. The average voter is not going to go weed through all of this, and so you're trying to find the right balance. There are states that have really thick, complicated laws, or I'll say worse is I think in some states, the disclosure statement, the paid for by, is like a paragraph. No one is reading a fine print paragraph. So it really just defeats the entire purpose of it. One of the things that our office has really done, so our Sunshine site has been updated. We've put a lot of effort to make it easier for the filers to report, but to try and provide tools for people to look at the information. So one of the things I'll highlight here, here you can search on our site to look at the information. All the filers just log in on the same page, have the information here. You can search by candidate, political committee, the reports, contributions. One of the easiest tools, and we'll be updating these now that we're ending the 2025 cycle and headed into the 2026 cycle, but these little drop downs, these have pre-baked searches, often some of the most common searches that people are looking for. You can go here and we'll be updating all of these. So if you want to see where the money is coming in, you can do it here. I wonder if I can bump this up a little bit so people can actually see it. Here you go. So, want to see top state fundraising, timed reports. So I will note, and we should probably, especially those of you who are frequent users, I see a few of you in the room, we're working on some of the updates to just make this more user-friendly headed into the next legislative race. But if I click here, it will pull up all the recent timed contributions that have come in. So you can see all the candidates. Let me go back a little bit and see who got the money. You can, so here you get a summary of it, the date that it was filed. Let's see. There we go. So here's the most recent ones, right? Where money's coming in, all those different reports. If you want to, you can click on it and see a PDF version with the detail of where the money is. I mean, that's part of, we talked about sunshine and transparency. Here it is. You can see all the different information regarding the finances. And same thing, you can search through. There's all sorts of filters. I think one of the hardest challenges for our office and sometimes users, and we're continually working to perfect this, is the volume of information that we're handling. We manage well over 3,500 campaign finance accounts in this system. So we're trying to shed light on everything from a school trustee race in Buell, where people are really passionate, versus the governor's race, and trying to balance that. And so it's always work in progress. We use the main page here as our main way to try and update, depending on the cycle, what's happening. Also, there's information, resources, both our manuals and some of the guidance that we've issued here along the site as well. I'm going to jump over. So our data and dashboards, I'll highlight real quick just before we get into lobbying. This will put some of the information in scale. So here, Gabe, our data nerd in our office, has provided these tools. So voteidaho.gov is your one-stop shop for voting information in the state of Idaho. Doesn't matter what part of Idaho you live in. For those of you watching online, you can go register to vote, find out all information. Also, the campaign finance portal is on here under the candidate information. You can go to our Sunshine page here for campaign finance information. But we also have our data and dashboards. And this is highlighting the spending from candidates for the 2024 election cycle. So this is for the legislative races in 2024. $17 million was raised and spent in Idaho. So just to give you a sense of the money when we were talking about it, I think for the general public, this often surprises people. This number will be much larger this cycle because you're now going to add the statewide candidates into this space. We weren't on the ballot in that cycle. You can see the breakdown, $7.6 million. That's the money that the candidates raised, all those direct donations to candidates. And then you have the second bucket there is the independent expenditures. Again, independent expenditures are those political committees where they're engaged in the political campaigns but not in coordination with the candidates. So $6.7 million, almost $6.8 million spent in support of candidates, $2.8 million spent in opposition to candidates during this cycle. And I'm just going to highlight a couple of things. I mean, one, you might notice Speaker Boyle cares about campaign finance laws. So you look at his race, it stands out in particular in this cycle. $200,000 that he raised and spent on his own campaign, $64,000 spent in support of him by political committees, and then $188,000 spent in opposition to him. And so you can see, I'm in a pretty intense race. Right now we're looking at the highest spenders, so you can see a lot of that activity. And you can see the disparity in some of these in terms of the PAC spending. As we scroll down, you'll see less and less of that outside spending. Now you'll see more of just the candidates spending races. The competitive ones in the state are both where most of the money comes from, but you get to see a lot more of the activity. I think the interesting thing of note here is when we look at the dollars by source, most of the money is from here in the state of Idaho. But of the money spent in opposition, so this is right now we're looking at the primary election. So you can see in-state versus out-of-state. But if we just look at the opposition, most of the negative campaigning comes from out-of-state. So you see more of that. I think there's just a difference between being here in terms of everything. All right, I am going to, Betsy, we had talked about taking a break, right?
Yeah.
We're going to I'll let you
Well,
lead.
before we do the
Okay, you want a
break, can
question?
I hit you with one last
I'm going to
question?
pause, so I'll take any questions right now for campaign finance before I pivot to
okay.
lobbying.
Okay, so here's a question. What if I can see that someone is campaigning but clearly hasn't registered or reported, what can I, as a citizen or a reporter, do?
Great question. The simplest thing you can do is contact the Idaho Secretary of State's office. We will point you right to it, but you can also file a, where am I at, Peggy? Huh? Go up to the top. Oh. Isn't it? Wait, it's on the sign. All right, when we get back from our break, I'm going to pull up this link and show you how to report a violation. How does that sound? Good time for a break.
Great. Okay, so
You stumped me.
we'll take a 5-minute break and we'll reconvene. And if there are remaining questions, if we have time at the end, we'll get to them.
Sounds great. Okay. Oh, it's right there. Yeah. Okay, I was right there. Okay. Yeah, okay. I found it. I just didn't see it right away.
I'm wondering.
Okay. We're back in action. I knew I wasn't that far off on the last question, so I'm going to start there real quick. If you are a member of the voting public, if you are a candidate, if you're a member of the media, Betsy had asked specifically about the media, and you see a violation, somebody didn't do something and you feel like you need to report, you can, one, contact our office, contact your local county clerk's office, but here in our resources, we do have our link to report a violation and Sunshine Act violations here in the center. You can write out the narrative, you can upload the images of the mailer, the yard sign, or everything else, and we have a whole process to proceed with those investigations. Even if it's a local violation, and it comes here, we will route the information to the appropriate authority and work with them to get it so that it's investigated and looked into. So just here on the campaign finance page, you can report a violation there. I'm going to shift gears and go back to my slides and talk to the other side of money in politics. And then we'll take some more questions at the end. This is an interesting part of it because all of the laws here, they've at least changed in the sense that we moved them all. We like packed up the entire laws and moved them. Lobbyist reporting. Lobbying is one of these interesting spaces. It's been around. It's been part of the Sunshine Act. Just like money in the campaign space, money here in the Capitol building, the legislative space, does have to be reported. But the rules are a little bit different. So the money, what we're focused on here is money spent to influence government officials and their decision making. So it's actually the money spent directly on the government officials, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. One of the biggest changes, though, I noted, it used to be campaign finance and sunshine laws were interwoven in Title 67. Now we have actually moved them to Title 74. So Title 74 is the transparent and ethical government section, which it seems like this should fit in there. I think someday campaign finance might find its way over there too. So most of the lobbying laws all stayed the same. They just got new numbers associated with them. So the text of the law didn't change. There were a couple of minor edits that we'll talk about here, specifically the addition of indirect lobbying, the paid-for disclaimer on communications, and then the changing of the reporting schedule. We now have monthly reporting for lobbyists. It used to be lobbyists reported monthly during the legislative session, and then they only reported annually. There's enough activity that happens all throughout the year now that there is regular reporting by lobbyists who are involved in the space. So lobbying is different. A couple of things. So anyone trying to influence policymakers, I will note that lobbying laws only apply at the state level. So at the city or county level, there are no lobbying regulations at this point in time. Most communities that wouldn't really apply, but when you think of cities like Boise or Ada County or some of these others, they don't have lobbying requirements, only here in the State House. So it can be any legislative official or executive branch official. So myself, the governor, any of the executive branch officials, it does apply. Basically what it is too is it's money being directly spent on or in maintaining relationships, entertaining, promoting goodwill with members that are regulated. There are these exemptions. So members of the news media don't have to report as lobbyists. They just like to maintain good relationships with elected officials. Members representing religious groups, I think that's an important designation with some of the topics that come up, members of trade associations. And then the other criteria to be required to report as a lobbyist, and I think for some of you, if you're watching this or you're in this room, you're more engaged than a lot of others. We have lots of citizens who come throughout the legislative session, and they come and meet with their legislator, and they testify before a committee. If you're here meeting with people, you do not have to register with as a lobbyist. And you can actually do almost all of the same behavior. We do see during the legislative session some people that call themselves citizens lobbyists. They aren't paid. They're just here. They hang out in the halls. And in other ways, they look like lobbyists, but they are not actually lobbyists. In order to meet the criteria to be a lobbyist, you must be compensated for the purpose of doing what you're doing. So make more than $250 in a calendar quarter. So basically, during legislative session, if you're compensated more than $250 for the purposes of lobbying, then you become a lobbyist. So the average citizen doing these things isn't. Once you meet that threshold, though, the specific reporting requirements are on any of the money spent influencing. So unlike campaign finance, where you have to report the source of the money, right? Who's donating, who's contributing. Lobbyists do not report the sources of their money. They'll have an employer that they'll report, but how much money they received or were compensated, Idaho does not require any disclosure of the compensation for lobbyists. It's only the money they spend directly on those they are lobbying. Just like campaign finance, you register with the Secretary of State's office as a lobbyist. We have our portal. It looks very similar. I'll pull it up in a little bit. It's a green version of what we saw, but it's all the lobbying information and all the lobbyist reporting, so very similar system. We just launched our new lobbyist system at the beginning of this year. So that was a big change for our office, trying to streamline lobbying. I will say through most of time, too, this is an area that just hasn't gotten very much attention. I've spoken to some legislators who didn't realize that when people were buying them lunch that they had to report that to somebody. And I was like, oh yeah, we report all that. Just ask the lobbyists, they'll tell you, because they find it a pain to do all the reporting throughout the year. But there are reporting requirements. Lobbyists must register each calendar year. So even though someone's been a long time lobbyist, every calendar year they must update their registration. And we see enough shifting and changing among who represents whom between years. And they must register before lobbying. So you can't do it after you start. You got at the beginning of the year or, and this happens because many of you might not realize it, during the middle of the legislative session, an entity might hire somebody as a lobbyist because maybe they just don't engage with the legislature, but all of a sudden a specific issue comes up that they really care about or that'll impact their industry. They'll hire a lobbyist mid-session to continue to do work to influence legislature. And so that can happen, but all of it happens on our site. This is the biggest thing when it comes to lobbying is it's just, again, all of this is about money. It's not about messaging. It's not about topic. It's not about whether we agree or disagree. It's all about money and how much money is being spent. So lobbyists are required to report all the money they spend on entertainment, food, refreshments. You see the list. This comes from the statute in terms of what they're directly doing for contacting. So the term lobbyist comes from people waiting in the lobbies. If you ever come here during the legislative session, this happens in the halls of Congress, but this also happens here. And if you go up to the third floor is where both the House and the Senate meet. And you look at their entryways when they're in the floor session, you will see a group of people sitting on the chairs waiting in the lobby. Those are lobbyists. Regardless of what color tag on, they're basically acting as lobbyists. That's where the name comes from. That's the traditional effort. It's buying a cup of coffee for someone, taking somebody out to lunch, holding a reception in the evening, or taking them to dinner. Those are the traditional activities of lobbyists. We still see that. And mainly, we require disclosure. If someone takes a group of legislators out to lunch and they buy that lunch for the legislator, they have to report the money they spent buying that lunch for those legislators. There are no limits in terms of spending as long as you're registered. It's actually a crime to give more than $50 to a public official unless you're registered as a lobbyist. If you're registered as a lobbyist, there's no limit. You just have to report it. So if you want to give somebody a yacht, you can. You just have to disclose that you gave them a yacht. I haven't seen that happen yet, but you never know. Things are getting creative. That's one of the interesting things is in Idaho at this point in time, it's all about just transparency and disclosure and highlighting to the general public. One of the distinctions, though, is if you buy a cup of coffee, you don't have to report that specific cup of coffee and who you bought the cup of coffee for. But if a lobbyist spends more than $135, then they have to report both who they spent it on and what they spent it for, like the specific expenditure. So they have to itemize that expense. So if you do buy a yacht, you have to tell who you bought the yacht for and what yacht and where you bought it from. The specifics have to be reported. This has kind of consistently been it. That threshold of $135 is set by statute. Our office adjusts it based on the Consumer Price Index. That's all by Idaho code. as I think everyone can interpret, I would say not that long ago, it feels like that went a really long way. Nowadays, it maybe doesn't go quite as far, but still $135 is a lot. So most of the reporting is there are lump sums. So how much money was spent on food, how much was spent on entertainment or other things are reported through our office. The big distinction in the new addition to our laws is this bottom item is indirect lobbying. So this year is the first year, so actually July 1 was when these new rules took effect. One of the biggest things, and I'll show some numbers to support this, that we're seeing a change in lobbying efforts. We're seeing more of the traditional campaign activities bleed into the lobbying realm. And so instead of going and buying lunch and directly interacting with a legislator or encouraging them to support or oppose an issue, now we're seeing the tactic of working the legislators indirectly. Indirect lobbying is contacting the voting public to encourage the voting public to apply pressure to a policymaker to make a decision. So the way that this looks in practice is text messages, mailings, digital ads, billboards. So it's different than campaigning. So we're not saying elect, don't elect, support, or oppose somebody. Instead, we're saying call Senator so-and-so and tell them to support or oppose something. So it's still lobbying. It's directed at a policy issue before a decision body, so most likely the legislature, but it could be anybody else here. And they're using those tactics. And so last session, we saw a huge increase in this activity. We've seen in the state of Idaho, we've seen billboards. Heck, we had a billboard truck driving around the Capitol with signs during the last session, encouraging people to contact their legislators. We are definitely seeing a rise of text messages. And I noted earlier, it could be, that pressure, but it also can be earning goodwill. So we also see the tactic of like, thank you to Representative so-and-so for supporting school kids, right? And supporting education. And so the same idea, it's a goodwill effort, but it's still intended to influence the legislators in terms of how they're making their decisions to cause them to do that. And so now there is a 48-hour reporting requirement. Anytime $100 or more is spent on indirect lobbying, it must be reported with our office. That way, when the legislator or starts getting those messages or get those mailings, their constituents call, they can say, what is going on? They can go look and at least see what organization or entity, what lobbyist is doing that and how much money is spent. I mean, they can at least look on day one and say like, oh no, how many calls am I going to get? And like, oh, they spent $100. Oh no, they spent $10,000. They get at least a sense of what's going on and where the source is coming from. Okay, look at that. I just gave most of my speech, and here's the sign. So this is a good example. Actually, this is a really good example. Modern Ag Alliance. This shows Missouri, but Modern Ag Alliance is the largest spender in lobbying. I'll show that here in a little bit in Idaho. So there's a specific issue before the legislature. And now that you've seen this, if you drive around Idaho, you may see billboards for Modern Ag Alliance because they've spent a lot of money here. This is kind of going down the same thing. All the lobbyist rules apply. This is where they are influencing indirectly. So going through. Now, in terms of the lobbying expenses, a couple things. The money that has to be reported is only the money directly spent lobbying the legislator. And we'll be sharing this with lobbyists as we go into the session. So a question we often get is like, do the lobbyists have to report their travel expenses to and from? And the answer is no. The people in Boise don't report their gas to get to the Capitol, just like the people in Coeur d'Alene don't report their flight to get here. They only report the money they spend, like buying the meal or doing whatever. Similarly, the best example I can say is there are lots of dinners and receptions that are hosted here around the legislative session. If, for example, I'm invited by a lobbyist to sit at their corporate table at a Chamber of Commerce event, for example, and they bought the entire table for $500. There's 5 of us sitting there. They only have to report the $100 that was spent on my ticket to be there. They don't have to report the other members of their corporation, right? It's only the influencing the executive or legislative official that has to be reported. So that question always comes up a lot because they may have a whole team of people. Some entities may bring 1 person. Some people may bring a dozen. They only have to report what is spent directly in terms of influencing. I'll note, I see at least one here in the room, state entities. This is a nuanced distinction that the legislature has made. There are state government entities that also are engaged in this space. Most typically, it's our universities get focused, where there are efforts. So let's say Boise State invites some legislators to the Boise State football game. Boise State has an obligation to report their expenditures. Very similar. They're not a registered lobbyist because they're exempt as a state entity from the lobbying rules, but the legislature has set criteria in terms of public reporting so that there's transparency by those organizations in terms of what they're doing. It's all basically the same, in essence the same, where it's giving gifts or anything other things that lobbyists do, but just ensuring there's the same transparency and sunshine on it. And we have a reporting system just the same for those entities. They register, but it's different than being a lobbyist, but the essence of it is effectively the same. Deadlines, campaign finance is the 10th of the month. The 15th of the month is our lobbyist reporting requirements. We have our lobbying team, where Nolan was here just a second ago. Oh, there you are, Nolan. You moved. All right, you're not supposed to move. Nolan and Grace, they assist people all throughout the year, really, but especially around the legislative session. Nolan's known for walking the halls, working with lobbyists, but also not only will we send emails and text messages, heck, Nolan will wander the halls looking for lobbyists to remind them they need to report. We'll do everything we can. Similarly, there's a fine, $50 a day, in terms of the lobbyists. And we'll note here for each employer, part of that is some lobbyists represent multiple entities. Some lobbyists only represent one organization or one person, and so it varies based on what they register as. All right, here I'm going to switch real quick. Let me pull up the lobbying system. Talk about money in Idaho politics for a second. This is going to be one of my themes coming up. Where are we? Didn't we have lobbying up? Oh, there it is. So, as I mentioned earlier, here is all of our lobbying information. You'll note it looks very similar. We just colored it green. You can search by lobbyist. You can search by the employer. Similarly, we have the drop downs to see the top spenders. There's a couple of things I want to highlight, though, because this site is new in terms of information. So whether you're in the media or the public, it's easier to search all this information, to look through things. I'm going to highlight a couple things just in terms of spending. So it's just interesting to see who the top spenders are. I won't survey this crowd, but typically people would think like the Chamber of Commerce organizations would be some of the largest spenders. I'll encourage everybody who knows this space to think of who do you think is the largest spender, aside from Modern Ag, since I've already said it. But we'll bring up some of the money here. So you can click in. Here I'm looking at it based on employer. Here's the listing of the various groups. But now I'm going to sort the information just for the sake of fun. Oh, am I in the wrong year? What's going on? Why is that not looking the way I think it would? Does anybody know? Gabe, do you have any idea? Something is not right. And I don't know what it is. Now I've given myself work. Either way, there's a lot of money spent here. Somebody is missing. Modern Ag Alliance would typically be at the top. That's the only thing that's distracting me right now. But you can see here the names of the organizations in terms of the amount of money that's being spent in terms of lobbying. So it's kind of interesting to see. For those of you who are familiar with the issues in the legislature, school choice was a major issue during the last legislative session. And if you start to look at some of these names, they seem like they might be tied to education. That's because they are. And that's on both sides of the issue. It's not one side or the other. Because you can see Idaho Education Association is one of the biggest spenders. But it is interesting to see. You'll note those top spenders. So all of those where it jumps up from $56,000 to $100,000, most of those organizations, not all, are out-of-state organizations. That's one of the things that's highlighted. And then the other part with it, which is really interesting, is this is where indirect lobbying. There's more money being spent on indirect lobbying. You can only buy so many lunches. $100,000 worth of lunches is a lot of lunches. And so this is where we start to see the mailers and some of the other campaign tactics. The other thing I want to highlight, though, here on our site, beyond just looking at that, is this tool. This is one of the newest things we added. Under the lobbying requirements, and this has always been the case, is lobbyists have to report the bills that they're tracking. each month when they do it. So most people focus on the money. But the other thing that can be tracked here, and most people know, we actually have linked up with legislative services. So any of you who follow bills during the legislative session and you see the listing by bill number, we now share data daily with them so that the lobbyists can just go through and hit check boxes on what bills they're working on. So here you can actually see also the bills in order by number, but also the number of lobbyists who are following them, the number of clients. So similarly, if I want to just go through, we can look at what are some of the bills that had the most lobbyists working and following them. Now, I will note there's organizations that track all of them. Some of our bigger associations will track everything in the legislature and they may report, but you can kind of see what are some of the more active topics. That doesn't mean the most money. Unfortunately, you can't tie directly money to legislation. Say you have a lobbyist that has 5 clients and they have lunch with a legislator, you're never going to be able to know how to divvy up, you know, was the carrot for this bill and the potatoes for this bill and the meat for a different one. We don't know. But you get to see who is working on these various bills. If you click on it, you can actually go look at the bill itself. We're linked to the legislative services. But it's kind of interesting to be able to dial in and search through all of this. So just, again, the focus of this, as we went to at the beginning, is transparency. That's what IDOG's mission is, to give more information to the public. And through our site, both on the campaign finance and the lobbying side, we're just trying to provide more tools for anybody who's interested in the public to be able to see what's happening here in our state. With that, Betsy, I'll turn it over to more questions.
Okay, and we're going to have a mix of questions about campaign finance and about lobbying,
Okay.
if that's okay. So the first question here is, how are independent expenditures categorized as for or against a candidate? What if an ad says, vote for A, not for B?
Good question. In terms of any of them for or against, it's based on however who is reporting it discloses. So all of this system still is on a good faith self-reporting. Obviously, we can investigate where necessary, but whether it's the amount of money being spent, the donations, we can look into it, but it's self-reporting, and same thing goes for or against. Yeah.
Does the reporting for lobbying reflect lobbying both for and against a given issue? Is that something the public is able to see?
We are not. So there is no reporting for or against, and it's really hard, and I'll give credit to the Lobby Corps in this space. It only takes a comma or a sentence to change the position that an organization may be on a bill. They may be with it until someone tweaks it, and then all of a sudden they're against it. And so all they're doing is just reporting that they're engaged on that specific issue. But there's no way to distinguish. Just like we can't tie that directly, it would be fun for us to tie the money to any. We'd love to see how much money was spent on House Bill 345. We can't do that. Similarly, and there's a decent chance a bill that has 71 lobbyists on it, people shifted from side to side throughout the course of that bill. It's almost certain that that was the case.
Here's a question. Why don't lobbyists have to report the source of the money they're paid? Isn't that something the public ought to know?
I'm going to distinguish this. So they don't have to report the money they're paid. They do have to report their employer, right? So if someone is employed by, I'm not going to pick on organizations, but let's just say, so some of the big lobbying organizations like Idaho Power they have both lobbyists that they have on staff that report in here, and occasionally on a specific issue, they may contract with lobbyists to also report. You can easily see that here on our website. So they do have to report the employer, but not what the compensation is. There are states that do require that level of disclosure. Idaho hasn't taken that up, and that's really a policy decision. The level of transparency, what's required, those are policy decisions for the legislature. And I would say at this point, the legislature here in the tenure I've been, not just as secretary, but working on, there hasn't been a strong desire. I will actually say the lobbyists generally want a few more tweaks and refinement for the lobbying rules, more so than the legislature has entertained it. But again, this is an area that hasn't gotten as much light and exposure, and so we're trying to amplify so that people know that these tools exist so they can go look at them.
What are some of the biggest changes you've seen with these on the lobbying side then, or the biggest complaints that you get from in your office that Nolan and your team gets?
Most of the issues we deal in the lobbying space are just reporting and making sure people file reports. And probably one of the more common one is someone engaged as a lobbyist and not registered? Like that's one of the biggest things I think we'll be chasing. The biggest change I've seen, and I kind of highlighted earlier, is just the amount of money. If we just went back just shortly, you wouldn't see nearly the volume of money. That indirect lobbying has really risen, and we're going to see it rise more. I think lobbyists are become more aware of this, and so when we look at the spending, we're going to see an increase of local lobbyists to kind of it's becoming an arms race. As Idaho is being noticed, we're seeing more money spent in this space. I think that's one of the biggest things is Idaho's a smaller state. It's largely been a smaller dollar state, and money influencing politics in Idaho can go a lot further, and all of a sudden we're seeing more interest and focus on Idaho.
A number of elected legislative officials seem to go on trips overseas and within the country, and also to political events like ALEC. How do we know how those trips were paid for, whether it was from taxpayer funds or whether it was by some organization attempting to influence our legislature?
That's a really good question, and I know a hot topic here in the legislature. There definitely are, because there can be both government-sponsored trips, whether that's taxpayer-funded or not taxpayer-funded, because there are government-sponsored trips, or there are these organizations that people will be members of. This topic has come in the legislature. Right now, there's reporting requirements. If a lobbyist takes someone on a trip, so let's just say that, because that could, there's no limit, and this does happen, where a lobbyist funds a trip, they do have an obligation to disclose it. It's over the $135, so it should be itemized and reported. I will say there's been conversations among the legislature about having more disclosure in terms of any of that travel. At this point, there hasn't been I've seen draft bills, but nothing that has come forward. Personally, I think sunshine is great for all of us, and I think it would be wonderful if all of these different things were disclosed. If they're happening, I think the public has a right to know, and I think the more transparency will help everybody in the system. And oddly, it probably won't. I think there's fear that it's going to mean something greater than it is, other than just sharing that information. And if you want to find out about any of the taxpayer-funded trips, you should attend the next session with Controller Brandon Wolf, because he'll show you exactly how to look on Transparent Idaho to see all of the trips that are being taken around the state.
Since the Secretary of State is responsible for oversight of elections, campaign finance, and lobbying, it seems like the Secretary of State's office should be a nonpartisan position to add to the credibility. What's your thoughts on that, and who monitors the Secretary of State's office?
Sure. Great questions. For anybody who's not familiar, I am a Republican elected official here in the state of Idaho, so it is a partisan position. I run statewide. Different states have different systems. Ours is the most common around the country in terms of electing this position. There are those that are appointed. I will say, as someone who works in this space very closely, the best cure for any of it is transparency. You should be able to see what we're doing. Right now, we're working on some difficult election issues in the state, and transparency, again, is the cure, letting everybody see what's happening. The same thing here. If you look in the campaign finance system, any of you are free to do it right now, I'm registered as, I'm the #1 registry. I was the first person to register in our new system. I have applied the same rules, so any money that is being spent either in the campaign finance space, if anybody is lobbying me, that has to be reported. And #1, I'll say too, in the election space, in our office, it's really important that we have people who care. Everybody has opinions. It's better that you know what my disposition is and my opinion is, so that you can watch and safeguard against that, whether it's me or anybody else, rather than the pretense of not having an opinions and positions. As election officials, I want everybody who's involved in elections to vote and have opinions and be able to exercise their constitutional rights just the same as everybody else does. And it's important. And so we certainly work in a way that we work with all political parties and all political stripes. And I think our office has a great reputation of working not just across the aisle, but at great lengths. But part of that, what we're able to do it, is that added level of transparency, showing our work, being able to, anybody who has questions, being able to hold us accountable just the same as everybody else. Not just on the spending piece, but right now we're having lots of conversations about showing your work in math, whether that's on election day or after, and we're going to continue to build more transparency in this space.
Here's a question that kind of touches on the intersection between lobbying reporting and campaign finance reporting. If there are no limits to contributing to a public official as a lobbyist, but a limit to political candidates when running for office, what process is done to ensure a contribution is for running for office rather than as a lobbyist?
I'm trying to tease out. I have not experienced an accusation of one being in exchange for the other. And I will say we don't see, I don't have any reason, it's not a lack of reporting of it. I just don't see that behavior, right, where one, the money really goes in, and it's fair to say a contribution to a candidate. So a candidate is a candidate at that point. They're not a legislator or lobbyist, is to try and get them elected. But either way, the same level of transparency. And I will say the good reporters in the room are very good about this. Just like they'll report on lobbying, they are very good about highlighting who gave money to whom in an election and support, whether that's an organization that is a lobbying arm. Because we do see many of the groups that are registered for lobbying also provide campaign contributions. Again, the simplest solution is transparency, and all of that is reported. And you can see if an organization, again, like an Idaho Power, is lobbying, you can also see the campaign contributions from an organization like that. And that's true for any of the various organizations.
That's kind of a similar question that came up. And I find this interesting. Do lobbyists, when their contributions from a lobbyist, do they appear on both systems? Do they appear on the lobbyist portal and on the candidate portal? Or
They do not, you'll never see the same thing double reported. It'll be either entered as a lobbying expense or it'll be entered as a campaign expense. The same people may be engaged in both. So you may see both an organization that lobbies providing financial contributions to candidates, but you also may see individual lobbyists, like them using their personal money to support candidates as well. That'll be reported, and that's helping them. That money, we didn't talk about it earlier, but there are specific purposes that campaign contributions can be used for. They can't be used for anything. There are limitations. Campaign contributions are for the purpose of helping the person get elected. They can't use it on themselves or for their own personal money. It is effectively a trust for the purpose of helping them get elected. So there are limited purposes there. And so that is reported, but you won't see that also then reported as a lobbying expense. The lobbying expense, typically in the cycle of things, you'll see donations given in the election cycle to help the person get elected. They'll get elected, and then you'll start seeing them buy lunches when the legislative session comes up and they start directly lobbying them. We do, in terms of how it's reported, have to help, especially with more of the indirect lobbying, in terms of what is the intention. Is the intention to influence a vote on a policy issue, or is it to specifically try to help someone get elected? And a lot of that has to do with word choices, like vote for, vote against. Is it supported a bill or opposed a bill? And so we try to assist in doing that. Most of the time, I will say at the time of year and the nature of the activity, it's relatively easy to distinguish between the two. Every now and then they can kind of overlap. And I will say there is no legal limitation. I think these guys know this. There's at least unwritten rules that legislators during the legislative session don't accept contributions, so that there isn't a perceived, quid pro quo. Also, there are criminal laws that exist in this space that if there is a contribution given as a quid pro quo for a vote, it's not just a fine, it's criminal.
The next question asks, some of the most consequential laws passed recently originated in religious groups. So why are religious groups exempt from lobbying requirements? Seems like an unfair advantage and a violation of separation of church and state. And then I have another related question after this.
I wasn't here in the 1970s. In terms of the exemption for religious organizations, I'm not actually familiar with the history, but the exemption has existed for a very long time. And so we do see organizations, even if they have religious ties, that do report, especially like in the campaign space, all that is reported. But that exemption for lobbying, it exists. But I don't know the background from it. Yeah.
So this one's more of a process question. Members of religious groups are exempt from lobbyist registration. Do they need to report if they host an event involving a ballot issue or something like that?
Yes. Good question. There's a distinction. There's an exemption related to religious organizations for lobbying. There are no exemptions as it relates to campaign finance. Historically, you wouldn't see much activity, but we do have issues coming up to the ballot, whether it's on a ballot measure or a candidacy, it doesn't matter. The same rules apply. And really important, Idaho has a specific statute on non-business entities. It's effectively a definition of a nonprofit. I had mentioned it earlier. A religious organization, so let's say a local church wants to get involved in this space, they too can create a PAC. But that's the same reporting obligations occur. They have to report the donations to that PAC. They have to, all the money that comes in, all the money that goes out. There are, I would say, if anybody's a part of an organization like that, I encourage you to contact our office. We've actually recently issued specific guidance, not to religious organizations, but to nonprofits generally, that is on our page, specifically focused on nonprofits to steer everybody in the right direction. Especially, we are seeing more activities in the nonprofit space, including religious organizations, with the some of the ballot initiatives that have been proposed. And so we want to encourage everybody both to disclose and report, but also to do it in a way that keeps everybody out of trouble.
Why is the Idaho Republican Party listed as a nonpartisan committee?
I don't know. I have a lot. Yeah.
Are they?
I don't, I have to, I mean, we can. Is this in the, let's see. Let's look at the Republican Party. Let's look at which one of the Republican. I should have been more specific.
Right there.
Here you go. Here's their page. Yeah, I don't know that they're listed. I mean, they are a partisan group, to say the least. Here's how much money they've got, if anyone wants to know where it came from. One of the things I'll note on here, it's something we're working on, but you may see between calendar years, right, there are different reporting years for this, so it's just a drop down to see the different amount of money that is being spent, not focusing specifically on the Republican Party, but here you go. You do that with any of the different organizations. Yeah.
This question asks, who is minding the store with the FEC stalled out?
I know you had asked in the break who's minding the store. That part I know. My role as Secretary of State and our office team is focused on state campaign finance laws. As I mentioned, the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, is handling all the federal laws. The core of the question, I'm sure the person who knows asks, the FEC is a bipartisan commission, and right now there isn't a quorum because of some of the commissioners have stepped down and not been reappointed and confirmed, and so they are in a holding pattern in terms of their ability to address any of the disputes at this point in time. Commissioner Dickerson is a personal friend of mine, and I had lunch with him right after he stepped down. I think he was the most recent one, but they're in a holding pattern until the president and the Senate can get that resolved.
So the reason I had asked the secretary about that during the break was I thought it was a very interesting question, except that I'm a retired reporter, so I haven't been paying that close attention. And I didn't know the FEC was stalled out. I wanted to just make sure.
One last one I had was, without giving away what you're planning to do for the upcoming legislative session, what are you hoping to make some changes in the finance campaign or lobby world?
That's a good way to kind of wrap things up. So campaign finance has been one of my focuses, especially recently. We're seeing a huge influx in terms of money spent, and that's not, when I say that, some of that is out-of-state money, but it's also within the state. Idaho is growing faster. We're seeing more engagement in politics, more money coming into politics, and our laws just really need to be caught up and modernized. One of the biggest challenges we see is, I mentioned earlier, the most common political treasure is a spouse or a friend, and our laws can be really complicated. There's a lot we can do to just simplify them and make it easier for people to comply. Right now, the rules for PACs are interwoven with the rules for candidates. They were interwoven with the rules for lobbyists. And so we've actually made an effort, and we had bills last year trying to delineate what are the rules for candidates, what do they need to know, what do PACs need to know, just trying to simplify it, but also add in things like social media and some of the other just more modern practices. And I will say some of it is just cleanup for simple things. Like, funny enough, I do not encourage anybody, but if you you start a campaign, I encourage you to open a separate bank account. The law doesn't require you to do that, but I can tell you it's going to be a really bad idea if you don't. And so we have simple things that we're trying to clean up. Same thing like the paid for disclosures. Usually when we get candidates or people contacting us, they just want us to tell them what to do. And sometimes the easiest thing we can do is just make the law clear and easy. The cleaner and easier we make it, the more likely people are going to comply with it. That increases the transparency of the overall system. Not only do we not need to fine anybody, but we actually get the sunshine that we're seeking as a state. And so I've been working closely with Speaker Moyle and others to try and see how can we update it. Betsy, you remember from, I guess it's been a while now, the last time when we added the website and some of the other upgrades, there's still more room to clean it up and add more transparency, because I do think what we see is when the public has the tools and information, they can make informed decisions, and the best place to do that is at the ballot box. So thank you all for attending. Thank you those of you who attended online. Hopefully this was informative and helpful, and I encourage you to attend our next presenter, Mr. Controller Wolf. Thank you, Betsy.
Thank you. I really want to thank Secretary of State McGrane for sharing all this information with us. We really, really appreciate his dedication to this. Let's hear it again for Secretary McGrane. I encourage you to go to IDOG's website at openidaho.org to check out our upcoming seminars. The next one will be on Wednesday, December 17th, here in the same place on Transparent Idaho Town Hall, Idaho, featuring our State Controller, Brandon Wolf. On Friday, January 16th, we will be examining the Idaho Public Records Act, and on Tuesday, January 27th, the Idaho Open Meeting Law. You may be receiving a survey by email asking you about today's session. If you do, please respond. It's just to help reassure our grant funders that we're doing what we say we do. Thank you all so much for coming.